The lecture hall fell silent as Instructor Vrel's secondary mandibles clicked in what we all recognized as barely contained irritation. His three eyes swept across the assembled cadets, most of whom were attempting very hard to look anywhere but at the humans sitting in the back row. "I will repeat myself one final time," Vrel announced, his voice carrying that peculiar harmonic resonance that made Corthian's speech sound perpetually annoyed. "The Nullifier entity cannot be stopped by conventional weaponry. Energy weapons pass through it. Kinetic rounds dissolve before impact. Plasma, lasers, rail slugs, nothing works." The 17 species who encountered it before joining the coalition learned this lesson at tremendous cost. Some of you seem determined to relearn it the hard way. He was staring directly at Cadet Marcus Webb now. The human, to his credit, didn't flinch. He just sat there with that infuriatingly calm expression humans wore when they were about to do something spectacularly stupid. I'd seen that look before during our demolitions practical when Webb had asked if the safety protocols were mandatory or just suggestions. "Cadet Webb," Vrel said, each syllable dripping with the kind of patience teachers reserve for students they've given up on. "Would you care to share with the class why you've brought your personal firearms to a lecture about an enemy that is, by definition, immune to firearms?" Marcus glanced down at the primitive projectile weapons strapped to his thighs. We'd all wondered about those. Human slug throwers were museum pieces compared to coalition pulse rifles, yet Marcus insisted on carrying them everywhere. Regulations technically allowed it. Technically. "Insurance, sir," Marcus replied with a slight shrug. "Insurance," Vrel repeated flatly. "Yes, sir. Against an entity that no weapon in the known galaxy can harm. No weapon we've tried so far, sir." The lecture hall erupted in that peculiar mix of sounds that 17 different species make when they're trying not to laugh. My own species, the Threxians, produce a sort of whistling wheeze when amused. It's not dignified, which is why I was trying desperately to suppress it. Vrel's skin shifted through 3 different colors, which on a Corthian indicated he was cycling through several responses before settling on one that wouldn't get him reported to the Academy's sensitivity board. "The Nullifier," he said slowly, bringing up a holographic display that made half the class recoil instinctively, "exists partially outside our dimensional space. It consumes biological matter at the molecular level. 63,000 sentients died during first contact incidents before we developed the containment protocols. Those protocols do not involve shooting it, Cadet Webb. They involve running very, very fast in the opposite direction while trained specialists handle the situation. And if the specialists aren't available, sir, then you die," Vrel said simply. "You die screaming as your component molecules are separated and absorbed. There is no heroic last stand. There is no clever solution. There is only following protocol and surviving, or ignoring protocol and contributing to the casualty statistics. Are we clear?" "Crystal, sir." I caught the slight emphasis Marcus put on that word. So did Lieutenant Kessa, our tactical instructor, who was observing from the side of the room. Her feathers ruffled in what I'd learned was the Avarian equivalent of a groan. The lecture continued with Vrel detailing the 17 failed attempts various species had made to neutralize a nullifier through force. The Grecians had tried quantum phase disruptors. The Toluvians had attempted gravitational collapse. The Mordesh had thrown an entire moon at one, which had been creative but ultimately just resulted in a nullifier with more mass to work with. Throughout it all, Marcus took notes. Actual handwritten notes on actual paper, because of course he did. Humans and their bizarre attachment to outdated technology. When the lecture finally ended, I caught up with Marcus in the corridor outside. My translation implant rendered his name as something approximating Stoneheart Wanderer, which I'd always found unnecessarily dramatic, but humans seem to enjoy dramatic naming conventions. "You're not actually planning to shoot a nullifier, are you?" I asked, keeping my vocal frequency in the concerned friend range. Marcus checked one of his weapons, a brutal-looking revolver that belonged in a historical archive. "I'm planning to pass the field examination next week, same as you." "The field examination where they're bringing in a contained nullifier to test our evacuation protocols. That's the one." "Marcus," I said, switching to a lower, more serious frequency. "I've known you for 6 cycles now. I've watched you turn every practical exam into some kind of human proving ground. Remember the zero-gravity rescue simulation? We saved everyone. You used the emergency airlock as a catapult. expedited evacuation. He corrected with that slight smile humans did when they thought they were being clever. And everyone survived, which was the point. The instructors banned that maneuver for all future classes. Because it worked too well, Marcus said, holstering his weapon. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but humans have this saying about unkillable things. Want to hear it? I suspect you're going to tell me regardless. Everything bleeds if you hit it hard enough. I stared at him, my three primary eyes focusing independently in what humans found unsettling, but which expressed profound skepticism in Threxian body language. The nullifier doesn't have blood, Marcus. It doesn't have biology. It barely has physics. It exists in 7 dimensions simultaneously, 5 of which we can't even perceive. Then I guess I'll have to shoot it in the 2 I can see, he said cheerfully, heading toward the armory that I watched him go, wondering not for the first time how humanity had survived long enough to reach the stars. Their entire species seemed built on the principle of confronting unkillable threats with inadequate weapons and excessive confidence. Still, I had to admit there was something compelling about it. Something that made you want to follow them into whatever disaster they were planning next, just to see if they'd somehow pull off another miracle. Or more likely, I thought as I headed to my own quarters, just to be there to document the spectacular failure for future safety lectures. Either way, next week's field examination was going to be memorable. The sound was absurd. After years of hearing the clean hum of pulse rifles and plasma casters, the raw bang of chemical combustion sounded like someone breaking furniture. The muzzle flash lit up Marcus's face for a split second. The bullet, a simple cylinder of lead and copper, streaked across the bay at roughly 400 meters per second. It hit the nullifier, and the nullifier screamed that I didn't know they could scream. Nobody knew they could scream. The sound existed in frequencies that most species couldn't hear, but my Threxian audio receptors caught it, a shriek of surprise, and something that might have been pain resonating across 7 dimensions simultaneously. The entity convulsed, its impossible geometry folding in on itself. Where the bullet had struck, if struck was even the right word, reality looked bruised. Purple-black wrongness spread from the impact point like ink in water. Marcus fired again. And again. Each shot produced that same brutal sound, that same flash of primitive fire. Each impact made the nullifier recoil, its form destabilizing further. The thing that couldn't be hurt was thrashing now, retreating from the human with the obsolete weapons. In the control booth, I could see Vrel and Kessa frozen, their various appendages locked in positions of pure shock. Impossible. Vrel's voice came weakly through the speakers. Marcus emptied both revolvers, 12 rounds total, each one punching into the nullifier with that same impossible effectiveness. The entity was contracting now, folding back into itself, trying to retreat into whichever dimensions it had come from. How? Kessa demanded, her translator struggling to keep up with her rapid-fire variant speech. Energy weapons passed through it. Kinetic rounds dissolve. How is he hurting it? Marcus calmly reloaded, his hands steady as he clicked fresh rounds into the cylinders. Because, Lieutenant, he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, your energy weapons were too sophisticated. Your kinetic rounds were too refined. You were trying to interact with it on its level, in its dimensions. He snapped the cylinders closed with a satisfying click. But these? He held up one of the revolvers. These are dumb. These are bullets made of lead wrapped in copper, pushed by exploding powder. These don't care about dimensional physics because they're too stupid to know they should. They exist in exactly 3 dimensions, moving in exactly one direction, with exactly one purpose. The nullifier had compressed to half its original size now, its colors flickering erratically. Sometimes, Marcus continued, advancing slowly. The simplest solution is the right one. Sometimes you don't need quantum physics or gravitational manipulation. Sometimes you just need a big piece of metal moving really fast. He fired one more shot. The nullifier collapsed entirely, sucked back into whatever nightmare space it had emerged from. The containment field snapping back into place around empty air. Silence filled the cargo bay. 46 cadets and 3 instructors stood frozen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Marcus holstered his weapons and looked up at the control booth. Does that count as following evacuation protocols, sir? Vrel's response took several seconds to arrive, his translator clearly struggling with the mix of languages he was attempting simultaneously. What finally came through was simply, "How did you know?" Marcus shrugged. "I didn't. But humans have another saying, sir. When everyone tells you something is impossible, sometimes it just means nobody's been stupid enough to try the obvious solution yet." He glanced around at the rest of us, still frozen in various states of shock and awe. Besides, the instructor said no weapon can stop it. Technically, I just made it leave. That's different. Lieutenant Kessa's laugh came through the speakers first, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Then Vrel's clicking mandibles, which might have been laughter or might have been an aneurysm. Then the rest of us joined in. That bizarre chorus of 17 species expressing relief and amazement and disbelief that I walked over to Marcus, my breathing spiracles still working overtime. "You're absolutely insane." "Probably," he agreed cheerfully. "But I passed the exam, right?" "Passed." Vrel's voice crackled through the speakers, having regained some of its composure. "Cadet Webb, you just revolutionized Nullifier defense protocols for the entire coalition. Past doesn't begin to cover it. Also, you're confined to quarters for 3 days for ignoring direct orders." "Worth it," Marcus muttered as we filed out of the cargo bay. I heard Kessa already on communications with Coalition Command, urgently requesting permission to test primitive kinetic weapons against nullifier entities. Behind us, technicians were swarming the containment sphere, scanning for residual dimensional traces. "You know," I said to Marcus as we reached the corridor, "you humans are going to give the rest of the galaxy a collective anxiety disorder." "Too late," he replied with that infuriating smile. "We've been doing that since first contact." He wasn't wrong. And somehow, walking next to this crazy human with his museum-piece weapons and his absolute refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible, I felt safer than I had in any of the high-tech, protocol-heavy training we'd done. Sometimes, I was learning, the galaxy didn't need more sophistication. Sometimes it just needed humans willing to point absurdly simple weapons at cosmic horrors and pull the trigger. Instructor Vrel's voice echoed through the corridor behind us. "Somebody contact the armory. Apparently, we're adding primitive firearms to the standard equipment requisition. And somebody find me a human weapons expert. Today has gotten very strange." I looked at Marcus, who was already grinning that tomorrow's classes were going to be very, very interesting. The field examination area was a converted cargo bay on the station's lower levels, roughly the size of a small stadium and fitted with enough containment technology to hold a small star. Which, given what we were dealing with, seemed appropriate. 47 cadets from 12 different species stood in neat formation while Instructor Vrel reviewed the protocols one final time. His voice carried across the bay with that same harmonic irritation, though I detected an underlying note of genuine concern now. "The nullifier you are about to observe is juvenile," he explained, gesturing to the massive containment sphere humming at the center of the bay. "It has consumed approximately 700 kilograms of biomass, which makes it roughly 3 meters in diameter. For context, the adult nullifier that devastated the Gresh homeworld's third moon was estimated at 40 meters. You will observe from behind the safety barriers. You will not approach within 20 meters. You will absolutely not attempt to interact with it. The exercise begins when the inner containment drops. You have 90 seconds to reach the evacuation points. Questions?" Marcus raised his hand. "Cadet Webb, if you are about to ask if you can shoot it, the answer remains no." "Actually, sir, I was wondering about the containment failure rate." Vrel's skin shifted to a suspicious purple. "The multi-phase containment system has a failure rate of 0.003%. "What?" "Just gathering data, sir," Marcus said with perfect innocence that fooled absolutely nobody. Lieutenant Kessa, who was monitoring from the control booth, made a sound through the speakers that her translator rendered as profanity in 6 languages simultaneously. The containment sphere began its descent into the bay, suspended by gravitational anchors that made the air itself shimmer. Inside, barely visible through the energy fields, something moved. It wasn't movement in any conventional sense. The thing inside didn't so much move through space as suggest that space might consider relocating around it, that I felt my breathing spiracles constrict involuntarily. Every instinct my species had developed over 4 million years of evolution was screaming at me to run. Next to me, a Teluvian cadet had gone completely rigid, which was their fear response. Across the formation, a Mordash was making a low keening sound. Only Marcus seemed relaxed, his hand resting casually on one of his ridiculous firearms. Containment drop in 10 seconds, Vrel announced, backing toward the reinforced observation area. Remember your training. Speed, not heroics. 9, 8, 7. Here we go, Marcus muttered. 6, 5, 4. Marcus, please tell me you're not actually going to do anything stupid, I whispered urgently. Define stupid, he whispered back. 3, 2. Shooting an interdimensional horror with a primitive projectile weapon. 1. Containment dropping. That's not stupid, Marcus said as the energy fields flickered and died. That's science. The nullifier expanded into real space like a wound in reality itself. It was roughly spherical, if spheres could exist in more dimensions than eyes could process. Colors that had no names rippled across its surface. The air around it didn't shimmer so much as apologize for existing. Evacuate. Vrel's voice boomed. The other cadets broke formation, sprinting for the marked exit points with varying degrees of panic and coordination. The Tuluvian had to be physically dragged by 2 classmates. The Mordesh was moving but making that keening sound louder now. I started moving too, because I wasn't suicidal. But I kept my eyes on Marcus, who hadn't moved at all. Webb, evacuate now. Kessa's voice crackled through the speakers, sharp with alarm. The nullifier began drifting toward the nearest cluster of fleeing cadets. Not quickly. It didn't need to be quick. It had all the time in several dimensions. Marcus drew both revolvers in a smooth motion that would have looked impressive in one of those old Earth action videos he was always watching. The weapons were massive things, burning chemical propellant to throw metal slugs at targets. Primitive, crude, laughably inadequate against an entity that existed partially outside conventional physics. Cadet Webb, stand down immediately. Vrel's harmonics had climbed into registers that indicated genuine alarm now. That is a direct order. Marcus fired. So what did you think? Did this story surprise you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this sci-fi story, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe for more mind-blowing science fiction stories every week. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.